Welcome to SpyCast, the official podcast of the International Spy Museum. I'm your host, Dr. Andrew Hammond, the museum's historian and curator. Each week, we explore some aspect of the past, present, or future of intelligence and espionage. If you enjoy the show, please consider leaving us a 5-star review. It really helps other listeners find us. Coming up next on SpyCast.
The rapport-based stuff, connecting to a person, not lying to them about who you are, being authentic, using empathy in different specifics or in different applications, not lying to somebody. It's 14 times faster.
This week's guest is Chris Voss, master in the complicated art of negotiation. Chris's career in the FBI sent him around the globe and positioned him across the table from some of the world's most dangerous criminals and terrorists. During his tenure as the FBI's lead international hostage negotiator, Chris honed his craft and developed unique methods of communication, focused on what he describes as tactical empathy. He joined me on the podcast to give us a masterclass on negotiation, including insights on the very basics of negotiation, including the phrase, never split the difference, the art of tactical empathy, case studies from Chris's career, and techniques in ethical interrogation. The original podcast on intelligence since 2006, we are SpyCast. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. It's a pleasure to speak to you, and thanks ever so much for taking the time to join me, Chris.
It's my pleasure. Happy to be here.
Negotiation, if you were to describe it just to the average person on the street, it sounds very instinctive. Okay, there's two parties, they're trying to reach some middle ground. But you have a book called Never Split the Difference.
Right,
so tell them what negotiating is from your perspective.
It's never two parties, and middle ground is a bad place to be.
Okay.
The first thing is there's always a team on the other side. Always, always, always. It's never, two parties if you're thinking that in terms of two individuals. But even in a home sale, a couple goes in to buy the home, husband does all the talking. He's not buying that house unless he works out with his wife later on, or there's a father-in-law, or there's neighbors. I mean, there's always people that are influencing the speaker, and the speaker is rarely the decision maker. Now, occasionally the speaker might be the most influential person on the other side of the table, but there's always a team on the other side, and there's always deal killers on the other side. And the deal killers rarely come to the table. And so then middle ground, there's a difference between blending and never split the difference. Let's find a middle ground, let's meet in the middle. That's a really bad idea. And one of the best analogies I could think of is steel. Steel is basically 98% iron and 2% carbon. There's no middle ground there. What's the proper blend of ideas? If you were imagining that, the iron union was talking with the carbon union, to be like, we got to be fair. It's got to be 50-50. And you'd have an unusable, unworkable product. And so the best blend is 2%, 98%. I know there's some changes in there for all of you physics people out there and steel aficionados, and you're talking about blends of chrome and all the rest of that, but let's not get too complicated. So then you go 2%, 98%, and you have the best product. And then iron says, well, we're 98% here. We get 98% of the profit. Carbon is, you're only 2%. And carbon is like, yeah, but without our 2%, we haven't got this phenomenal blend. It's perfect. So we deserve half. So you start talking about fairness and meeting in the middle and all this nonsense, and you're not focused on what's the best outcome, what's the best combination. And then you add in the additional idea is, I'm holding stuff back in every negotiation. There's never a time when one side isn't holding information back. What's my budget? What are my deadlines? Am I being threatened with being fired if I screw this up? Am I gunning for a promotion? All the stuff that I'm scared to tell you. Every time. There's never a negotiation. We're constantly asking people, have you ever been in a negotiation where you weren't holding something important back? And everybody goes like, no, you're not going to show all your cards. Well, that means the other side's holding important stuff back that you don't know. So you can't possibly know the best outcome because there's really important things you don't know. And then sort of the quantum physics mind-bending aspect of it is, what's in the overlap of the unknowns? If I don't know what you're holding back and you don't know what I'm holding back, there's some really cool stuff here. If we could just show each other our cards, we have no idea what the best outcome is. None. But most people approach negotiations like, yeah, I know, I've been doing this a long time. I know everything's important. I know in advance what the best outcome is. There was a book a long time ago about negotiation that lasted for about 2 seconds. I think it was called The 10 Commandments of Negotiation. And one of the commandments was, it is what it is. Well, if you don't have all the information, you can't say it is what it is. You got no idea. So take it and make it collaboration. Look for the best collaboration. Now, what you described before is most people's perception of what negotiation is. Two parties, adversarial, find a middle ground, best outcome. We can declare victory and go home. And if that was the case, things like steel would never be invented.
Let's take another example that will be something that I guess most people could relate to. You want to get a pay raise.
Right.
That's quite an interesting one because you have a boss who's got hierarchical control over you in an organization. You don't want to lose your job, but you're maybe saying, if I'm not getting what I'm valued for, then I'm going to look for another job.
Right.
You want to make them feel like they're going to lose something significant, but you could call their bluff and they're like, yeah, that's fine, we'll find someone else. You've maybe got a fallback position. I don't want to settle for less than this, but you want to kind of reach for something else. So, and the boss is approaching it from a different point of view. We've got a pay structure, does this person deserve a raise, et cetera, et cetera. So help me kind of unpack that through the art of negotiating as you would approach it. What advice would you give to the person, the listener who wants to get a pay raise?
So the first question is, who are you working for? Are you working for somebody that wants you to grow and develop? Are you working for a company that values you? I have frequently gotten questions from females saying like, I'm working in a company that's famous for underpaying women, paying men more. How do I get them to pay me more? And my answer is quit. So first of all, the approach is, do your values line up with your employer's values? Does your employer value you as an employee? Now, you need to quit that job if they don't, because that's a bad company corporate value, and they're going to go out of business. Eventually, they're going to get gobbled up by somebody else. They're going to have problems. Your position is coming to an end eventually, and you want to get out of there while you can position yourself for the market best, as opposed to suddenly coming back to work and finding the doors locked. Now, in the interim, what are you faced with? How do I get paid more? Be more valuable internally. Great negotiation is about understanding how the other side sees things. You don't have to like how they see it, but you got to recognize reality. Ignore human nature at your peril. Ignore reality at your peril. What's the reality that no employee likes? Your boss sees you as selfish. How does that happen? The only time you ever walk into his or her office and you want something for yourself. Bosses are conditioned that the people that work for them, the only time they're making an appointment to come into the office to have a sit down is because they want something for themselves. So you got a human being you're dealing with. You conditioned him that you don't walk in there to help him out or her. You don't walk in there going like, hey, boss, how can I get more work without getting paid anymore so I can make your life easier? That is not the approach. The approach is, hey, boss, how do I get paid more for doing the same amount of work? So that's what people walk in the door for. I'm not getting paid enough. So then recognizing that now gives you the strategic tactical advantage to approach them. Very close friend of mine, guy I grew up with in Iowa. I'm originally from small town Iowa. And the point of this is my buddy Tom McCabe is the head of an international bank. Now, Tom and I both started in the same spot, small town Iowa, no great family connections. You know, didn't brunch at mom and dad's country club with the other rich people. Now, set Tom back even a little more, like he went to a tiny school, his undergraduate degree, only an undergraduate, you know, not a PhD, not from an impressive university, tiny school in Missouri. What does that mean? No great alumni network. Head of an international bank. Great emotional intelligence, not just for the people he works with and who work for him and his customers, but his people he works for. What am I driving at? Every single job interview he's ever had and is consistently in his annual reviews, he asks this question: how can I be guaranteed to be involved in projects that are critical to the strategic future of our organization? And bang. Now he's basically asking a question: how can I be the most impactful employee you have? How can I make everybody's life better? How can I be the ultimate team player? Now the approach is you get paid more when you add more value. As long as the value you bring to the company exceeds what you're getting paid, there's no limit on to how much they can pay you. Now, strategic projects, critical to the future of the organization, that broadens the view of how they see you. You're no longer selfish. You're not just a team player. You want to move the whole organization forward. Now, you got to mean this. This can't be lip service. You have to ask to play in a championship game. You got to be asking to play in a Super Bowl and want to play in a Super Bowl. Pressure makes diamonds. You got to want to be a diamond.
So it sounds like part of the art of negotiating is understanding where the other, like having some kind of situational awareness about where the other person's coming from, and then also both of your position within a broader ecosystem. Is that right?
Yeah, that's very well said. Situational awareness is really important, and then realize that there's going to be stuff about your situational awareness you got to be willing to be corrected on. Like it's a guess, it's a hypothesis. So, the whole point of the way we've structured labels, like it seems like something's bothering you. That's effectively a hypothesis that I'm willing to articulate, that I'm willing to be corrected on. Be willing to be corrected. The fear of being corrected is one of the things that I think holds people back the most from looking at negotiation as an exploratory process that I'm going to get data from. Essentially, there's 3 types of negotiators: analysts, assertives, and accommodators. Fight, flight, make friends. Analysts are flight. They think combat is very costly, wasteful, counterproductive. So they don't like to fight. Fighting is a possibility, and it's highly costly. The assertives, the fight types, best represented by Donald Trump, looks at negotiation as combat. Wants to defeat the other side. Make friends, accommodators, very hope focused, want the interaction to be extremely pleasant. Each one has a different approach to how they see negotiations and how they look at it and what they're looking to take away. But what the original point was, the information that you get at the table, the analysts, they hate getting caught off guard at the table. Unexpected information scares the hell out of them. And so they want to know everything before they get to the table. What does that mean? If you're an analyst, you're going to spend 2-3 months preparing for the negotiation to dig up all the information that you could have found out in 20 minutes at the table. So if you work for me And I think time is money, and it is. Elon Musk said recently, he said, time is the ultimate commodity. It's the most valuable commodity. Do I want you spending 2 months achieving something you could get done in 20 minutes? No, I want you to get to the table and find out what you're looking for. But if you're the highly analytical type, that horrifies you. You don't want to get caught off guard at the table. So looking at negotiation as an information gathering process is helpful because it'll get you to the table. There's data you have that you can only get from the other person. LinkedIn profiles, company websites, those are dating profiles. You need to meet that person in person to find out how accurate that dating profile is. No matter how much research you do, you ain't going to find out till you get to the table. And that's one of the critical aspects of negotiation. It's not to sit at the table and do offer counteroffer. It's to sit at the table and gather information. Establish a relationship, develop rapport so that you can tell me things, the stuff you're hiding that you're scared to tell me. Now we get a good collaboration of information going. Now we can put our cards together and come up with the best outcome.
So we've spoke about negotiation, then we've had the examples of iron and salary. Could you give us a couple of examples from your career that help to illustrate your broader approach to negotiation? So if I understand correctly, over 150 cases that you worked on, are there any that particularly stand out as instructive or as learning experiences for people that want to understand negotiation? I mean, I'm sure they all have their own unique elements to them, but we can't discuss all 150, unfortunately.
Yeah, right. That'd take a while. Now, you learn the most from a bad situation. There's post-traumatic stress disorder and there's post-traumatic stress growth. So things going bad are often the most instructive. The great Irish philosopher, Colin McGregor, said,
I heard him called that before, but I like it.
I win or I learn.
Mm-hmm.
You don't learn from victories. You learn when things go bad if you try to analyze it and you try to learn and move on. So I'm a series of events, and the point that I'm going to is if you got a great process, it creates great outcomes. Unexpectedly wonderful black swan outcomes fall out of the sky. You got a great process. Forget about, what is it? One of the 7 habits is begin with the end in mind. Well, no, let that go. With a great process, you got to let the end in mind go because you get tunnel vision if you get too focused on the end. The end is a suggestion, maybe. And then realize you could do better because you're in the dark about all the information. So I'm working a case in the Philippines, a Burnham-Sabero case. I talk about it. There's a documentary out about me and my company now called Tactical Empathy. It's on Amazon. Burnham-Sabero case is in the documentary. It's also in my book. Went really bad. Lots of people got killed. Botched rescue attempt at the end. Accidental rescue, if you can imagine that. Philippine Scout Rangers opened fire on an encampment of terrorists, Abu Sayyaf terrorists. They didn't know that there were any hostages there. They just thought it was bad guys. They opened up fire on them and shot and killed everybody. And 2 out of 3 remaining hostages were killed. Gracia Burnham was wounded and she lived. Martin Burnham was killed. Deborah Yap was killed. Friendly fire. But among the bizarre things that happened through the course of that case, I get back from an unnamed government agency that one of our hostages has been overheard on a phone call. And I'm like, what? Like, overheard on a phone call? Like, the hostages aren't ordering pizza. They're not calling DoorDash. What the hell are they doing on the phone? And that's all the information I got. And I go back to my boss at the time, Gary Nestner. I go, what the hell's going on here? He goes, hostages are only on the phone to provide proof of life. Like, proof of life? Here's what is short-circuiting my brain over this. First of all, We never get hostages on the phone. Who's out there getting them on the phone is succeeding at proof of life with a verbal confirmation that I haven't gotten. And secondly, who the hell's getting proof of life on my hostages? Because that means there's another buyer out there. There's more than one buyer here? This is crazy. So this kind of blows me away. And, in the midst of the case, but it always bothered me, like, who was it? We found out later on that it was a Philippine politician that was very corrupt and wanted to reach out to the bad guys to ransom out the hostages in order to embarrass the government. And then how that got next is a whole separate story of the bizarre nature of intergovernmental kidnappings and crises. But afterwards, I'm thinking to myself, how the hell how they get them on a phone? Like, we asked the proof of life question, which is what's like your security question, like what street did you grow up on? Who was your teacher in the first grade? It's a question only you can answer, which is why it's a security question. We use that as proof of life. What was the name of their first pet? That kind of stuff. Didn't do it at the time because I knew the hostages were alive. I didn't need proof of life, and I also didn't want to put us in a position where we owed the bad guys. Because if you ask for something, there's a legitimate human dynamic of reciprocity, and you don't want to put yourself in that position. So I'm flummoxed by this thing. And then a couple of months later, there's a kidnapping in Pittsburgh, drug dealer on drug dealer, bad on bad. And in the United States, who do you go to when you're in real trouble? Go to the FBI, even if you're a drug dealer. Your girlfriend's been kidnapped by another drug dealer, who do you go to? And so the bureau guys are riding around with the drug dealer who's trying to get his girlfriend away from the other drug dealer, and on his own, spontaneously, he says the immortal words, "Hey, dog, how do I know she's alive?" Since he's not a sophisticated hostage negotiator, what he just does is ask the legitimate question. Yeah, how do I know? Why are we even talking? It's a question the other side has to say to themselves, it's actually a good question. And there's this long silence, and a drug dealer on the other end of the phone says, I'll put her on the phone. I'm like, that's how it's done. And in the change in tone of voice, I realize that who's got the upper hand in the negotiation just changed in that instant. The great how question. So I'm talking to my colleagues at CNU. We worked as a team. We thought as a team. Even though I was in charge of the international program, I'm not making any changes unless I'm bouncing off everybody I'm working with. And I'm saying, like, hey, guys, this is what I'm thinking of doing. I'm going to change our proof of life dynamic to the how question. This is how this is how I got there. This is what my thinking is. And everybody internally on the team, brilliant guys. I worked with a bunch of brilliant guys. I worked for a great guy, Gary Nessner. There's a number of brilliant guys, Vince, Chuck, John. Brilliant guys. And I go, am I smoking something here? And they're like, no, you're on the right track. So, I wave the magic wand, make the change. Field negotiators were working a case in Ecuador at the time. Now, the field negotiators have not been, that I've deployed on the case, the guys that are deployed downrange, they have not been part of this process. All they know is that suddenly Voss is flipping a switch, and we got a new strategy, and new, without context and background, scares the hell out of people. They're like, I don't know. And I was kind of like, I'm in charge. You're going to do that, or I'm going to pull you out of the country. I'll replace you with somebody that will. So they went along with it. But the local negotiators in Ecuador, the Gaula, they're like, no, we don't, that's not the way we do it. And it was really hard to tell the Gaula, like, the proof of life question that you're used to, we actually taught that to you 15 years ago. You didn't think that up on your own. We taught it to you. Didn't matter. In the case afterwards, our hostage ultimately escapes, which is a great thing that happened out of the sky. Created a great process the bad guys on the other end, we had the wife saying, how do I know my husband's even alive? How do I know he's alive? How am I supposed to pay if I don't know he's alive? Legitimate questions. And they never gave us proof of life. And I was initially extremely, oh my God, this is my new strategy. We didn't get him on the phone. About 28 days in, he escapes on his own, goes out a window in a hut in a jungle, driving rainstorm, 2 o'clock in the morning, saves himself. But the wacky thing that happened was, halfway through the kidnapping, this guy's first name is Pepe. They start referring to him as Don Pepe. And we're like, Don Pepe? That's a sign of respect. What in God's name is going on? That he's no longer hostage number one, he's Don Pepe. And so between flummoxing them respectfully and deferentially, and then his own emotional intelligence skills, the alchemy of that combination combines to create him escaping. So he escapes, and I go to upstate New York, sit down with him and his family to do what we call a hostage survival interview. You know, what did you think about? How did you get yourself through? It ends up being highly therapeutic for kidnapped victims to not be interrogated about their experience, but to be curiously asked about the dynamics. Very therapeutic for every hostage we ever did it through. But I really want to know what happened to my proof of life strategy. I really want to find out how come we never got him on the phone. And so I'm sitting down with him and his family, and I'm like, hey, you know, and I kind of back into it. And he says, yeah. He said, you know, the dynamic was they send a rep from the guerrillas to a local town to make the phone calls, make the deal. Then when he's got a deal, he comes back out in the jungle, presents it to the boss, and it's either thumbs up or thumbs down, which is actually what happens in every business negotiation. You're negotiating with a rep, and you come to an agreement, and then the rep takes it back, and either the boss agrees, or the lawyers on their side agree, or they do thumbs down. Like I heard a long time ago that fully 50% of the deals that Verizon cuts never gets implemented because they get killed in terms and conditions. That's him taking it back to the boss in the jungle and asking him if he likes a deal. But they're not supposed to do it till they got a deal. In this particular case, Pepe said, yeah, you know, the guy who was supposed to be in town kept coming back out to the jungle. They kept having conferences as to whether or not they were going to take me to town and put me on a phone. What that did was change the internal dynamic from how do we get a deal to present to the boss to how do we show he's okay so we can get a deal. It's a sequencing change. And afterwards, I realized we'd never forced the other side into an internal collaboration that favored us ever before. And their collaboration on showing he was okay then changed their entire approach to him, which then he sensed, and then he brought his own acumen to bear to create the opportunity to escape. So it's a very long story of saying, if you got a great process, good things are going to fall out of the sky. And finding the faults in your process are going to come from your disasters.
It's fascinating the way that you describe that. So it sounds almost like you go into a negotiation that the 7 habits of highly effective people begin with the end in mind. Put that to one side as a suggestion. When you enter into a negotiation, you actually want to get into it with the mindset of entering an open-ended process where you're constantly picking up on tidbits of information.
Yes.
And you're applying them to a process or a model that you've worked out previously based on experience. You're applying those data points to this model that you have.
Yeah.
and you're trying to reach the optimum combination of steel and carbon. Is that like a way to describe it?
Yeah, that's a great description. And then just having the faith that, number one, you're going to find something better. And number two, that it's actually going to accelerate the process. Those two things scare the hell out of people because they're afraid it's going to take longer. Human beings engage in interactions and negotiations in something that I have come to refer to as DPO, or duration, path, and outcome. Where do I want to be? How long is it going to take me to get there? How am I going to get there? Duration, path, and outcome. And that is to let all of those things go. Now, this is highly destabilizing. I don't know where I'm going to end up. Oh, my God. I could end up in a bad place. I don't know how long it's going to take me to get there. Oh, my God. It could take me 5 times as long. I don't know how I'm going to get there. Oh, my God. I'm going to get lost. And to engage in a great process is, from experience, from having done it, finding out that all those things get better. Now, I originally had that forced on me when I volunteered on a suicide hotline. Great training. And, you imagine a conversation to talk somebody off a ledge or out of suicide. And anecdotally, you hear stories about somebody stayed up all night with their friend. There's a collective soul song about that very thing. Stayed up all night, trying to talk people into something. Richard Branson has a story in Losing My Virginity. He was into crisis intervention in his younger days and being up all night trying to save people's lives. But, a virtuous thing to do. Phenomenal. So you get to the hotline and they go, yeah, you got a 20-minute time limit. And you go, 20 minutes? Yeah, Song of Collective Soul, they're up all night. How are we going to do this in 20 minutes? And they said, no, as a matter of fact, it'll take less time than that if you do it right. So they put you through this training and you're exposed to it little by little, and then you start seeing this magic happen in 20 minutes or less. And then the first time you get on the line and somebody who's genuinely suicidal or they're in crisis, somebody can be completely in crisis and not be suicidal. And I was on a crisis hotline because, you could be in crisis but not wanting to kill yourself. And in less than 20 minutes, you're in a much better place. And you're saying like, yeah, that's the step I'm going to take. And I'm going to be okay. So I got it forced on me to learn that I'm going to create a better outcome in far less time if I let go of these constraints that I think is going to happen.
That's fascinating. What if you get into negotiation with someone that, and we all have this experience, you get into negotiation with someone that's clearly an egomaniac or who's clearly very obtuse and just don't really want to learn from you or read you or pick up the data that you're dropping down? Like, how do you deal with those different types of human personalities that you must inevitably come across as a negotiator?
Yeah, well, if I diagnose them early on and to be in that kind of a mode and I can't get them out of it, and I'm going to do a couple things to try to get them out of it. But I'm not going to spend a lot of time. If I can't get them out of it, I terminate the negotiation. A friend of mine, Joe Polish, runs an operation called Genius Network, and he categorizes clients' counterparts into 1 or 2 categories: ELF, easy, lucrative, and fun; half, hard, annoying, lame, and frustrating. And he says, stop doing business with the halves and do business with the ELFs. So probably about 4 or 5 years ago, maybe 6 years ago, I run across this and I say to my team, we're going to adopt and we're going to operationalize this. The halves are going to be eminently predictable. And I learned this from hostage negotiation because a hostage negotiator has a success rate of about 93%, which means there's a 7% failure rate, not quite 1 in 10. And my old boss, Gary Nessner, came up with a block of instruction called high-risk indicators, which are the 9 indicators of somebody who's never going to make a deal. And it's your job to see that at the very beginning. It will, if you're willing to be open and there are patterns, they will manifest themselves and you will see it. So I'm like, all right, so we got high risk indicators of half. Let's operationalize it. Let's live it. What are the indicators? So I lay this on my sales team and I say, start working on a profile of the halves. And then I hereby authorize you right now to walk away from them as soon as you diagnose them as a half. Now, they are working for, Chris Voss, Negotiator, and they think they got to make every deal. So they don't embrace this immediately. But what they do is they develop a profile, and sure enough, the profile will manifest itself in the first half-hour conversation. And then instead of immediately walking away, they start pulling data, which is what you should do. And the data they're pulling is, if they meet the half profile, what's the timeline for making the deal, if we make it? What's the timeline for implementing the deal, if we implement it? And they came back to me and they said, every half costs us from 2 to 5 times the amount of time to make the deal and implement. So what does that mean? You just took a 50% cut and pay for the half. Or is that person who's hard, annoying, lame, and frustrating, do you say, oh yeah, I'll only make the deal if you pay me half, if I take a 50% cut? Because that's what's happening if it takes twice as much time. Secondly, all right, so you would take a pay cut for recurring business. Long tail, as they would say in business. Repeat business for the next 20 years. Well, no, the halves don't repeat. If they were hard, annoying, lame, and frustrating for you, you won't cut another deal with them. Or you were hard, annoying, lame, and frustrating for them, and they won't cut another deal for you. So the reality of the person you're talking about, the person who's the egomaniac, who is obtuse, who just won't listen, who just won't collaborate, you have to take a 50% cut and pay to deal with them, at least, and you get no repeat business. Why would you do that? Well, I'm desperate for money. As it turns out, the nature of the universe is the halves, the hard, annoying, lame, and frustrating people are blocking you from the elves, the people that are easy, lucrative, and fun, the people that want to do business with you. They're standing in line. You can't see them. You don't imagine they're there. But the halves are keeping you from them. And so the amount of time that you spent on the one deal with the half, who doesn't repeat, you could have made anywhere from 2 to 5 deals with the elf, and they will repeat because you guys loved each other. Now, that's really hard to wrap your mind around when you're first beginning. You think, I'm desperate for a deal. You know what? I don't care about this long-term thing. I got rent due now. I got a rent payment coming up. And the minute you shift over to at least, instead of tomorrow, 6 months from now, then this dynamic begins to manifest it, and your life will accelerate, and things will work out much better.
And I want to ask a few questions about the applicability of this methodology to the intelligence community. But before we get there, just one final question along the vein that we've been traveling. So I think that you could understand all of this stuff cerebrally,
Right.
intellectually, but speaking to you, you've got a radio voice. You've got very considered body language and eye contact.
So do you.
So I'm just wondering, how much is that a part of it too? Is this something you were trained in? Are negotiators like you made? Are they created?
I'm of the school of thought that everything is learned.
Okay.
I think Daniel Coyle wrote a book called The Talent Code, and Coyle's central premise is that everything is learned. The people we see as prodigies just started their 10,000 hours before anybody else did. Now, if there's anything that's innate, I think it's whether or not you're coachable. Maybe that's innate. I'm eminently coachable. And I've learned the hard way who to listen to and who not to listen to. Never take advice from somebody you wouldn't trade places with. Never take directions from somebody who hasn't been where you're going. You might trust them. They still might not know what they're talking about. You trust your parents. You know, I'm telling a Lyft driver a couple years ago. He had this great voice. He says, yeah, my mom says I should do voiceover work. I know enough about voiceover work to know it's very hard. It takes a lot of discipline, a lot of work. Like being good at anything else, people who do it make it look easy. So he says this to me, and I go, is your mother in the voiceover industry? He's like, no. I said, okay, never take advice from, I'd say, don't take advice from somebody who hasn't been where you're going. Your mother loves you. She doesn't know what she's talking about. That doesn't change the fact that she loves you. So what am I driving at? I'm coachable, but I know who to be coached by. And my voice, my approach, my demeanor, I learned it. There were some people I listened to that were wrong. There's still very many people trained in negotiation or communication that are wrong. So who do I look for? Who do I listen to? The people that their track record has demonstrated to me that they know what they're talking about.
So there's someone that I know who was involved in a case with a spy in the American government, and they went in to be one of the people that interrogated or spoke or debriefed or whatever you want to call it. They went into this spy, and the person in the room was doing the old, like, you know, bad cop routine.
Right.
You know, you're a disgrace, you betrayed your country, etc., etc. His approach was he found out that she didn't like the food that was being given to her. He went to Whole Foods and got like some of the food that she liked and gave it to her. You know, never tried to suck up to her, but just try to, like, I guess, meet her more on her level. And then eventually she opens up to him and starts talking to him.
So is this a good cop? Is it good cop, bad cop? Is this bad cop?
So it was, I guess it was a bad cop, but it wasn't a concerted good cop, bad cop routine.
Mm-hmm.
He just read the room. He was like a sort of, I guess, a kind of bit part player who took up the space when the other main person left.
A bad cop left off.
And he kind of like figured out a way to like try to get her to open up. Do you ever get brought in to help people that are involved in these types of situations? Does this stuff have applicability for that type of stuff?
Oh, well, it does. I mean, all of what I'm doing for business people now is all grounded in those methodologies or the mistakes or the deviations from those methodologies. So when the greatest, and I don't even like the word interrogators, the greatest investigators are great interviewers, and they're rapport-based. And nobody can really understand what they did because it was invisible. It was rapport-based stuff. And they work magic. They develop, confidential sources without being a bad cop. The bad cop stuff is highly ineffective. There was a study done. Derek Gaunt's on my team. He wrote a book about tactical empathy and leadership called Ego, Authority, and Failure. And especially after 9/11 and the harsh interrogation techniques were out of control, a subsequent study was done that said rapport-based interviewing was 14 times more effective than harsh interrogation techniques. 14 times. Not even close. So the bad cop stuff is punishing. It's self-stimulating. I remember when I finally saw the movie Oh Dark 30 about, largely based on reality, the SEALs finally catching up to and killing bin Laden. And I'm watching the depiction of the harsh interrogation techniques, thinking like, no wonder it took us so long. This is everything that the intelligence community is doing to try to track him down is highly counterproductive. It creates terrorists. And like maybe you could live with creating terrorists if it worked, but it didn't work. I mean, it took them way too long to catch bin Laden than they should have because they're using harsh interrogation techniques. Like, I'm not going to take a position on it morally. I'm just going to say what works. It doesn't work. So the rapport-based stuff, connecting to a person, not lying to them about who you are, being authentic, not being threatening, actually being understanding, using empathy in different specifics or in different applications, not lying to somebody, is 14 times faster. Another study referred to it as the closest thing, rapport-based interviewing, the closest thing to a truth serum that law enforcement had. Now, that's a wild statement. And simultaneously, neuroscience now, because this was pre-neuroscience, listening to Andrew Huberman, one of my favorite podcasters, a person I happen to think the world of personally. Andrew's a friend.
You've been on his show.
I've been on Andrew's show, and I think he's a phenomenal human being. But I also listen to his show because it's science-based stuff. So he's talking about, there's a relationship podcast he's talking about. So it's relationships, romantic relationships. And he starts talking about oxytocin, the bonding drug. And when you feel, I understand you, not when I understand you, but when you feel I understand you, oxytocin is triggered. It's a neurochemical. It's not psychology. It's science. You bond to me. But then the additional kicker that nobody knows about on oxytocin is it also inclines you to tell the truth, hence the comment about it being a truth serum. So rapport-based approach to interrogation or a negotiation, you bond with me and you're more honest with me. Well, this gets us back to, in a business deal, you hiding information from me. If I can make you feel understood, suddenly it's as if I've waved a magic wand, you're opening up. That's why it's 14 times faster, whether it's in law enforcement and terrorists or businesses. When I first got to New York, there was an agent on a terrorist task force named Larry Wack. And he was famous for getting really bad guys to openly cooperate with him. And people always shook their head going like, how did Larry get Eddie to talk? Like, my God, Eddie was a terrorist and a really, really bad guy. And the next thing you know, he's opening up to Larry. And Larry was this non-threatening, he wasn't quite aw shucks, but he didn't stare anybody down. He used a little bit of self-effacing humor. He was really easygoing. And not just Larry, but the other guys there made case after case after case. And everybody else just went like, I don't know how they do it. Because this rapport thing, this empathy thing, true empathy, not sympathy, is you don't see it in the moment, but then suddenly somebody's opening up and nobody knows, like, wait a minute, 5 years ago or 5 minutes ago, this guy was angry. Now he's opening up, but nobody saw the transition. It's invisible. And that's probably why tactical empathy as an approach is not that adopted, because if you're the bad cop, you're having a good time being a bad cop. It's very satisfying to you in the moment. And you forget that it didn't result in cooperation. But empathy in the moment is not satisfying, but it's astonishing in its effect. And when you get used to it, then you just sit back and you wait, and you just sit there going like, it's coming, bang. We're collaborating.
Just as we get towards the end of the interview, counterintelligence, so you're in the FBI for many years.
Right.
And there's a whole part of it that's devoted to counterintelligence.
Right.
Was there any bleed over between the world that you inhabited and that world? Were any of the skill sets that you would use be taught to them, or was it kind of closed off? Help me understand the
people
the
always
interchange.
in law enforcement agencies, intelligence, counterintelligence fields, they're always trying to understand how to best connect, how to be most effective. And I think that short-term gains can often be misinterpreted because they work short-term. Like in the intelligence community now, they've gone from harsh interrogation techniques to, I can't think of the name of the terminology. It'll come to me in a minute. but it's manipulative. And it's not that far off of the old. A long time ago, there was another interrogation program that I took a look at because I was trying to learn how to be a better interviewer, and it was basically getting someone to believe in something short term, but long. I'm going to be your friend short term, but I'm really trying to hurt you. Manipulation. It's a manipulation technique because people are trying to be more effective. And I don't believe in it. I believe that you should be long-term open with somebody and not promising things or not try to, deception by omission. Are you my friend? Yeah, I'm your friend till I put the handcuffs on you and put you away for life. Are bad things going to happen to me? Well, I don't know. I'm just trying to help you. That's manipulation. Are bad things going to happen to me? Yeah, you're looking at some time. There's an issue as to how long you'll be in jail. I'm not trying to tell you you're not going to jail. The first guy that I brought out of the Chase Manhattan Bank, a bank robber that surrendered to me personally outside. He's like, I don't want to go to jail. And my response to him was, well, the longer you stay in there, the more likely you're going to be in jail for a longer time. Which means I'm not trying to kid him about going to jail. I never said, I'm gonna help you. I said, I'll stand up for you in court, and I'll be happy to tell the judge how you helped bring this to an end. But by me saying, I'm going to stand up for you in court, is not, you ain't going to jail. If you're going to court, you're going to get locked up. You're going to stand in front of a judge, and you're going to be judged. Now, what you do from this point forward, we can't change what you've done in the past, but we can change how this is going to go forward. I'm being honest. And eliciting information, I think is what it's called, that the intel community likes. What are the techniques so that I elicit information from you, but it's not in your interest? And I think they went there because we did and should have, and waterboarding is a bad idea. Any sort of harsh interrogation technique is a bad idea because it's counterproductive. In point of fact, let's take the morality out of it. I want to know, does it work? And then is it moral? And rapport-based interviewing and being open and honest works, and it's moral. Eliciting information works short-term. It's questionable whether or not it's moral, and then it's counterproductive long-term. So your original question was, do the intelligence community, the counterintelligence, is this applicable? It's applicable. It's nuanced by what your goals are. My goal, if you're a bad guy and I've got you in custody, is I'm going to be honest with you. And you're going to cooperate with me for a longer period of time because I was honest with you.
Just out of interest, why would the FBI as an organization, why would it use elicitation in one division, but in another division, it's this approach of just being radically honest? Listen, I'm not going to soft pedal it for you. You're going to do some time, but from this point forward is going to determine how long you're going to do and how it's going to shake out.
The intel community gets to set what their values are. And when you're in the intel community, and they're going to say, they will have vetted it. They're going to say, this is legal. It's not unconstitutional. It doesn't violate any of our laws. Our prerogatives at this point in time is prevention is more important than apprehension, which is often the default case in terrorist cases. It's better that we prevent it than apprehend them because apprehension has a certain degree of risk. And the problem is if you're just into prevention, you never lock the terrorists up, then they just get smarter every time you prevent them. They scatter, they learn, they get smarter. But when you're working in an organization and they tell you what the core values are and they are legal, they pass all legal scrutiny, you start getting into real gray areas when you're talking about morality. And then your choice then is, all right, do I want to work intel with the Bureau or do I want to go back and I want to work criminal cases because I can't live with this? Or if I want to work intel, do I have to do eliciting information? Or can I just stick with rapport-based and integrity? And I'll stack my track record up against anybody's. And most of the people that I know in government that are highly entrepreneurial will say, you know what? I'm gonna do the rapport-based stuff, and I'll let my record speak for itself. And those are the Larry Wacks of the world that rack up one phenomenal success after another. While the eliciting information guys are getting small amounts of information, they're effectively C players. And if you're a C player, you stay employed. You never failed, but you were never an A player. And the A players are always rapport-based, honesty-based, always.
Mm-hmm. Wow. That's a good place to close off. This has been really incredible. Thanks so much for speaking to me, Chris.
I enjoyed the conversation. Thanks for having me.
Thanks. Thanks for listening to this episode of SpyCast. Please follow us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Coming up next week on SpyCast.
It's formally known now as criminal investigative analysis. And at its basic precept, it's an investigative technique to identify the major personality, behavioral, and psychological characteristics of an offender based upon the crimes that he or she has committed.
If you have feedback, you can reach us by email at spycast@spymuseum.org or on X at INTL SpyCast. If you go to our page at thecyberwire.com/podcast/spycast, you can find links to further resources, detailed show notes, and full transcripts. I'm your host, Andrew Hammond, and my podcast content partner is Erin Dietrich. The rest of the team involved in the show is Mike Mincy, Memphis Von III, Emily Coletta, Emily Renz, Afu Anokwa, Ariel Samuel, Elliot Peltzman, Trey Hester, and Jen Ivan. This show is brought to you from the home of the world's preeminent collection of intelligence and espionage-related artifacts, the International Spy Museum.